What's up, cats? Today I'll be talking about the most important instrument that you never actually hear, the bass. The bass is one of two instruments in the band that will almost always be playing, made significantly easier by them not needing to breathe at all. However, these instruments are almost polar opposites, as while you'll always be able to hear drums, a lot of the time you'll only be able to hear the bass if you're really listening for it, and if it's not a good mix, forget about it. Well, if we don't ever hear the bass, then do we really need it at all?
Yes.
The bass is the only instrument that constantly occupies this register. Bari and bass trombone can go down here as well, but they can't play constantly without breathing like the bass can, and also take on a much more prominent role in this register. Bass can play down here constantly without breathing, but if you ask Bari or bass trombone to do the same, you are not going to like the after effects. While instruments shouldn't only play the roles given to them by most big band charts, the bass is one of two exceptions, as there isn't really another instrument that can do its job in the same way. Sure, I guess piano could do the same thing since it can also play in that register and not have to breathe, but why? What's bass gonna do? Just sit there and watch the piano walk for the entire chart? Are you gonna write a walking bass line for them to play together for the entire song? Do you play bass? It probably won't be a good bass line if you don't. Just let the bassists handle it. It's what they spend 95% of their time doing. But don't think you can just give them chord changes and call it a day. The more clear you can be with your instructions, the better. The more variation between sections, the better. One example that's somewhat overused is having the bass play halftime on the A section of a chart, start walking on the bridge, and then go back to halftime on the last A section, then go into walking once solos start. While it clearly works, it commits to the walking bass line way too early. When the bass isn't walking, I think of this as rhythmic tension. Full swing feel is unlocked by the bass walking in quarter notes, so if you write anything else for the bass, you can think of it as building until the moment you finally let them walk. Saving the walking bass line for the right moment of the chart will help it swing significantly harder, and the contrast between sections will make it more interesting for the listener as well. You can also apply this technique to charts that aren't swing, by using ostinatos, stop time, giving the bass lines centered around playing longer notes, or just telling them play more sparse. I like to think of it like eating really salty food without drinking water. The more food you eat without drinking water, the more dry your mouth is going to feel, and the water will taste significantly better than if you were to drink water immediately after eating something salty. So the longer you can go without the bass walking, the harder it will swing when it does start walking. Also important is deciding to use electric or acoustic bass. Unlike electric piano, electric bass can be used basically anywhere without really changing the vibe of the chart that much, and there's many more genres where acoustic will sound out of place than electric will. Acoustic is obviously better for swing, but electric still works here. But if you try to play acoustic on a funk fusion chart, or a rock chart, the sound won't really have the edge that you want here. The only genres where electric bass would be completely unoptimal are the ones where you want the full, rich sound of the acoustic bass, like ballads or more floaty charts. But whichever bass you write for, you also need to consider what the other instruments are doing. For example, if you have Bari and bass trombone playing a low ostinato, you're probably going to want bass on this as well, or not playing at all. If the bass tries to play something else on top of this, it won't really work, as they'll just be fighting for attention. Low stabs are fine though, as the point of these is the initial attack, with the bass creating motion after the fact. Or, if the band is playing a really offbeat figure, it would probably be better to have bass line up with this instead of just doing something on their own. Bass is a transposing instrument, playing an octave lower than what is written on the staff. This is done to prevent excessive ledger lines, keeping bass mostly in and above the staff. Since bass only plays one note at a time, you don't really have to worry about lower interval limits, but it's still good to keep in mind to avoid a minor 9 violation. Bass, being a string instrument, is going to sound good in every register. Since the bass player is going to be the one picking the majority of the notes that they play, this part might be slightly redundant, but it's still good to know in case you write a chart where the bass parts are mostly written out, or for when you give the bass ostinatos. This register is best for when you really want the bass to sing out. It gives a really unique color, as while it plays just as low as Bari and bass trombone, it doesn't give the same intensity or volume. You can use it as a sort of middle ground, as it will still add some intensity without being as committal as putting it in Bari or bass trombone. While any of these notes will sound good, the open strings will have just a bit more resonance. The lower part of this register, along with the upper part of this register, is where you'll be writing the majority of your parts, as it is still lower than almost every other instrument in the band, but without the big jump in intensity the really low notes give you. It's It's also the best register to write parts in, as it's what bassists will have the easiest time reading, and the register bassists spend most of their time walking in. This is the range you'll be writing in the least. The bass will only be heard up here in very exposed parts of the chart. High bass ostinatos are a really interesting sound, but only work when they're the main focus. Bassists will also struggle to read in this register a lot, as it's not something they usually encounter. There is an easy solution though. Another difference between the acoustic and the electric is that the electric is a lot more agile. While acoustic can play fast if it tries really hard, it's significantly easier to do on electric. Doubling the melody, or moving lines on electric bass is a really cool effect, but it does take careful planning to make it work, as you'll need another instrument to take on the role of the bass, or do it in a section where you don't need it to fill out the bottom. You also won't be able to pair it with anything that's too loud. One area where this works really well is development sections, as these tend to feature a more gradual build, and the general idea is for there to be a large contrast from the rest of the chart. Unlike most instruments, you have to be really careful about giving solos to the bass. It's extremely easy to overshadow, and can also derail the momentum of a chart if used at the wrong time. I like to use it best as a palate cleanser, or right before a really big moment of the chart. Bass solos are usually really quiet, so if this immediately goes into a shout section, or follows a shout section, it will create a lot of contrast. But if you want a solo that builds intensity leading into a big moment, it might be best to pick another instrument. The bass can also run into endurance problems, but not really on the level of brass players. Really all you need to watch out for is playing really fast charts for long amounts of time, especially if the entire chart is just them walking or playing an ostinato. But as long as it isn't a really fast chart that's like 10 minutes long, it should be okay. Bass is probably the least used combination with muted trumpet, as while it does work really well, there aren't many times when bass will be free to play in combination with it. The attack of the string being pulled adds a really unique color to the sound, and the bass can get up to the range muted trumpet sounds good in. Do keep in mind that you'll only be able to use it effectively on short notes, as the bass doesn't really have a good method of sustain. Okay, sure, but most jazz bassists aren't going to be able to sound good in this octave with a bow, and if they're playing electric, definitely not happening. Flute and electric bass also create a really unique sound, and are best equipped to play moving lines. This creates a lot of contrast from what the bass is usually doing. Flute will usually be 1 to 2 octaves above the electric, so you'll have no problem hearing either. You can also add muted trumpet on top of this, as muted trumpet and flute go together great as well. Overall, while bass will be playing its preordained role most of the time, they can play roles outside of that as well. Using the bass for these other roles is how you can really make your chart stand out, making it a lot more bassed.